Alright, welcome back. In this video we are getting started on the pause feature for the game. If you are just stopping by this particular video to look up how a pause function can work inside Construct 3, we will cover the timescale code very quickly right here towards the beginning of this video. And if you're looking for a more dynamic version of a pause feature for your project, then I invite you to stick around for the rest of the video. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are on the level 1 layout tab, and I'm going to use this dotted line here, this little square, as a guide. This is the size of our viewport when we play the game. We're just going to use this area as a guide to get this set up. So with the HUD layer selected and unlocked, let's double click on the layout and go down to our sprites. And let's place it somewhere over here. And I want to go to load image from a file. And if we navigate into our UI folder from the assets that are available for download through the link in the description. So in our UI folder, we have the icon pause sprite. Let's open that. And this is how it loads up. I'm going to zoom in here. So with your origin tool selected, make sure your origin point is right in the middle. And let's get our bounding box. And I want to right click on one of these nodes and pick set to bounding box. And then we can go ahead and exit out of that. I'm going to call this btn underscore pause. All right, I'm going to move this onto our little viewport area here. I'm going to zoom in, and we're just going to hold him down here for a second. Okay, I'm going to go over to the main event sheet, and I'm going to put our pause logic on the main sheet. So I'm going to right click and add a group, and I'm just going to call this pause. And if we add an event to pause, let's go into our input folder, grab our touch, and say on tap object. And that object is going to be our button pause. Okay, so Construct 3 and, well, many game engines for that matter, have an expression called timescale. And the timescale expression controls the timescale of the game. And that is what we are going to manipulate to pause and unpause the action while we're playing a level. So let's go ahead and add an action. Go into System, and I'm going to type in time, and we want set time scale. So up here it tells us 1 equals normal speed, 0.5 is half speed, 2 is double speed, 0 is equal to pause, etc. So one method you could do is say when we tap on the pause button, we want to set it to 0, which would be pause. But then we want to be able to tap on the same pause button again to turn it back to 1 at normal speed. So instead of setting this up in 2 different events with multiple lines of code and other actions, we're going to type in an equation and let the game engine do the math. So when the game starts, unless we tell it otherwise, the game is going to start at a timescale of 1. So to get it to change each time we press the button, we're going to make sure that it sets it to 1 every time we do press the button. But then we're going to subtract whatever the timescale happens to be at that time. So we can type in timescale. So when we start the game, the timescale is going to be 1, normal speed. If we press the pause button, timescale will now equal 1 no matter what, minus the timescale, which is 1. So 1 minus 1 is 0. So now that the timescale is 0, when we press the pause button again, we're going to automatically set timescale back to 1 minus the value of timescale, which we just said was 0. So 1 minus 0 is 1. So now it's back at normal speed. So that saves us a lot of different events and code to write out. Okay, so here is something that we want to do to our pause feature to separate it from being used anywhere else other than on a level. When we collect the diamond, we set our is playing to 0, meaning no, we're not playing anymore. And at the start of each level, we set is playing to 1, meaning, yes, we are playing. So after all this code runs at the very beginning of the level, we say, okay, now we're playing. And that stays 1 or true until we either collect the diamond or we die. And we set it to 0 here. So if we win or die, we tell the game that we're not playing anymore. So for our pause button, I only want the pause feature to work if we're playing a level. Because once we finish a level and we go back out to the map or the retry menu or the title menu, I don't want the player to have the ability to pause the game because we don't want to pause it outside of a level. Over here in this area, I'm going to double click. I'm going to go to System and I want to compare a variable. And that variable is going to be is playing. And I want to know if it is true. So is playing is equal to 1. Now we're checking 2 conditions. As long as we are playing and in a level and we tap on the pause button, then we can change the timescale. Okay, let's head back over to our level 1 tab. And we're going to set up a few more things visually, but I want them to be on its own pause layer. So come over to the layers panel, right click, and let's add a layer. And I'm going to call this pause. And it can stay at the very top. So when the pause menu comes up, I want visually it to say pause and have the option to either continue playing or quit out of the level. And over here we have button quit and button play. So I'm actually going to right click on btn quit object and go down to clone. I'm going to go ahead and rename it btn underscore pause quit. So the reason we need these to be separate objects instead of reusing these is because these are going to actually be a different size than these are in the game. So we want this one to exist at its new size. So I'm going to drag our new button pause quit object onto the screen. And already, if this is our viewport, this button is really big. And if you remember before, over here in the properties, we set the X and Y scale to 22%. I'm going to drop those both down to 16%. And then over here, our button play, I'm going to right click on it and clone it as well. Then I'll select it and let's rename it real quick. btn underscore pause continue. And then we can drag that out onto the layer and do the same thing. Come over here to the properties and change the X and Y scale to both 16. So we're going to have these 2 buttons appear, and then I want some text up here also. So I'm going to double click on the layer and scroll down, get our text object and insert it. And I'm going to call this txt underscore pause. And then I know about what size I want it, so I'll save us from guessing. I'm going to set the width to 208 and the height to 64. And then if we scroll down, we can change the text to read pause in all caps. I'm also going to change the font to the Consolis font that we've been using. And then I'll change the size 34. Bold is good. The color I'm going to make white. And then our horizontal alignment center, vertical alignment center, and origin right in the center. So it's going to be something like that. So now we're going to drag in another object that we have used before. In our HUD folder, we have this UI level totals frame. I'm just going to drag that out onto the layout, and we're going to reuse this. And we're going to reuse it as the same object because we're not going to change anything about it, about its appearance. But I do need it to be at the bottom of this pause layer. So with that selected, we can right click on the object, go to Z order, and say send to bottom of layer. So we want our button and our text object to be on top of the frame. Okay, so something to consider is our frame. If I zoom in, you can see this little bitty blue dot right there. That is the origin point. It is in the middle at the bottom. I'm going to figure out where I want this frame to be because we're going to put all this stuff inside of it. So I want the bottom middle of the frame to be right dead center of the viewport. So over here in position, we know our viewport size is 360 by 640. I want the origin point of our frame at half of both of those numbers. So that's going to be 180 and 320. I'm going to zoom in a little, and I'm going to just kind of move these into place where I think I would like for them to be. So I think the button's probably somewhere like that. The pause is going to be in the middle, kind of like that. So I'm going to go in and figure out where these origin points, if you see the origin point for our buttons is at the top left on both of them right there. And then our text is right in the middle of the text object. So I'm going to figure out where we could put some image points on this UI frame for these to match up with. All right, so I did some number crunching off camera and I found out an issue that we might have run into. I'm glad I did that. So if we double click into our button pause quit, and I want to change the origin point to the bottom middle of the button sprite. The bounding box is larger than the actual sprite itself. So I want to account for this extra pixels going on over here and down here. So the origin point is going to be an X value of 298 and a Y of 227. Okay, let's exit out of that, and now it moves the origin. And then let's go into the blue one and do the same thing. 298 and the Y 227. We can exit out of that. Okay, now we just need to make some image points that match up with those two image points. So let's go into our UI frame, and you can see our origin point is down here at the bottom middle, but I want to add some image points for our buttons to match up with. One will be around here, another over here, and then our text will be up here. So let's right click, add a new image point, and we're going to change the X up here, the X value to 82, and the Y value at 134. So let's go over here and right click and add another image point. Our X this time is going to be 200, and our Y will be 134, the same. Let's add one more image point, and our text is going to be right in the middle, so 140 is right in the middle, and our Y will change to 36. Let's exit out of that. So this is roughly how it's going to appear on screen. To get this to appear on screen, we're going to have to load it in to the pause layer at the beginning of each level. Now we could go over here to main, and in our pause group, we could just start creating all those objects to happen. Actually, we would have to create another on start of layout event to make sure at the very start of each layout, we would create all those objects. And you could do that and it would work just fine. However, I'm going to put this creation of these objects at the beginning of each level into its own function. This will make it easier to read, and there won't be as much clutter on your event sheet, and all we'll have to do is call the function in the main event sheet at the beginning of each level. And actually, we'll put it in our start level function. So on our functions tab, let's right click and add a new group, and I'm going to call this pause creation. And if you hover above this add event pause creation and right click on it, let's go down to add function, and we'll call this function pause creation. And by doing it that way, right clicking on this little link right here, it puts the function in our group. So the first thing we're going to create is going to be our pause button. Now I want to know a good location for it, and that's why we're using this viewport up here as a guide. So right now I have snapping on, and it's putting it at 32 and 608. So it's 32 pixels from the left and 32 pixels from the bottom. I'm actually going to move that up a little and over a little. So I'm just going to say an even 40 pixels from the left and the bottom. So let's go back over to our functions and let's add an action. Go to System, and say create object. And then let's go grab our pause button. And the layer, we want this to start out on the HUD layer. So quotation marks and HUD, and that's the HUD layer. And then instead of getting the exact coordinates, remember I said I wanted it to be an even 40 pixels from the left and 40 pixels from the bottom. So we're just going to type that in using the viewport expression. So for the X, type in viewport, and that's going to be viewport left. We need to tell it the layer that that viewport is on. So in parentheses, and then we need to put a quotation mark because we're calling a layer, and that layer is the HUD layer, in the quotation mark and end the parentheses. So viewport left, parentheses, quotation marks, HUD, quotation mark, in parentheses. And then I want it to be 40 pixels from the left. So I'm going to say plus 40. And for the Y, let's type in viewport bottom. So that gets us at the bottom, and we want that same layer. So parentheses, quotation, HUD, quotation, parentheses. And for the Y value increases as you go down on the screen, and we want it to come up 40 pixels. So we're going to subtract 40. All right, now let's add that frame. So add an action, go to System, say Create Object, and let's go select our UI frame, and it's all the way at the bottom, okay? I want this to be created on our pause layer. So quotation marks, pause, and we're going to do something similar with our X and Y value where we want this to be created. Remember I said that I wanted that origin point of that frame to be right dead center of the screen. So we're going to call the width of the screen and cut it in half, and the height of the screen and cut that in half. So let's type in viewport width, because this is the X. So viewport width, and that viewport is in parentheses and quotation marks, the pause. We're going to say /2, because that means divide. Divide by 2. We're going to cut it in half. So the viewport width is 360, and then cut it in half, that's 180. So it's going to set the origin point, which is at the bottom middle, at 180 on the X value. So let's do the same thing down here for the Y. Let's go find our viewport height this time. Get our pause layer and do the same thing. Divide it by 2. All right. Okay, now we can create those buttons. So let's add an action. Go to System. Let's create another object and go find our button, pause, quit, because I want that to be on the left side. So we'll do that one first. The layer is going to be in quotations, pause, and the X, we're going to access those image points that we just made. So the origin point is image point 0. Then we made image point 1, 2, and 3. And 1 was on the left, 2 was on the right, and 3 was up top for the text. So we want the one on the bottom left. That's going to be image point 1. So let's call our UI frame object, and then dot image point X, and in parentheses that image point is image point 1. Then I'm going to highlight all this, copy it, come to the Y, paste it, and change that X to a Y. Now let's add another action. System, create object, and this time we can get our continue button. The layer is going to be the pause layer. X, we're going to call our UI frame dot image point X, and in parentheses that is going to be image point 2. I'm going to highlight and copy all of that, come to the Y, paste it, and change the X to a Y. And then we can create the text that we made. So add another action, System, create object, and let's go find that text object, text pause, the layer, pause. The X value is going to be our UI frame dot image point X, and that is image point 3. Let's copy that, paste it down here, change the X to a Y. The frame needs to be created first, and then we create the buttons and the text. And these could really be in any order, but they have to come after we create the frame. Otherwise, if the frame gets created later, the frame will get created on top of the buttons. Now, if we go back over to our level 1, and I want to show you, we're going to use some text that we have created. I'm going to close that up. In fact, I'm going to open up our buttons and slide our pause button into that folder. And then our text pause can go into our text folder. And then I'm going to open up the text folder, and I'm going to find text quit, and I'm just going to drag it out to show you. So if we zoom in, we are going to reuse these text pieces, quit and play. So that is what it'll look like when this comes up. So I'm going to zoom in and show you on our button, we have our origin point down here, bottom center. On our text, we have the origin point in the center of the middle. So I want it to match up on the X plane exactly what the image point of the button is, but I want the Y to be up further. Okay, so I'm going to delete both of these, and back over on our functions, we're going to add another action and say system create object, and then we'll go find the text quit, and then the layer is going to be the pause layer. And our X, we're going to get that button's X point. btn, and then it is pause quit. And that's going to be .x. And then I can actually just copy that and then paste it down here and change that X to a Y. And for the Y, we want to come up. So we're going to subtract some pixels. And I'm going to take a wild guess and just say, let's say 14 pixels. I might be right, I might not. And then let's add another action, say system, create object. Let's go grab the text play, and the layer shall be pause. The X is going to be btn pause continue .x, and I will copy that and paste it, change the X to a Y, and then say -14. And we will see how that looks. But first we have to make sure that we call this function or none of this stuff gets created. So let's go up here to our function start level group, and we can go all the way to the bottom and add an action, go into our functions, and let's call our pause creation. And that can stay right there at the bottom. I'm going to close this up. So if we go into our level 1, and let's just preview this and see what we got. And right away, I realize we forgot to do something. It's actually seeing this right here, and it's also creating it right on top of it. So what I'm going to do, a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm going to delete all of these instances so that there's nothing here. And then with our pause layer selected, we come over here to the properties, and we want to change our scale rate to 0 and our parallax to 0,0, just like we did for the fade and HUD layers. Let's preview that. And wow. So we got giant buttons, and I know what the problem is. So this is one of those situations where if the object does not exist in the game, meaning we haven't placed it inside a layout, then construct 3 creates the object at its default values. So if we go into our meta layout, we get to use this again. So I can already tell you that our pause text object, even though we couldn't see it on screen because the buttons were created after the text, so it covered it up, we're going to need to drag this on to our meta layout, And then I'm going to close the text, and I'm going to go into our buttons, and I'm going to bring out our button pause continue and our button pause quit. If you remember, we set the X and Y scale to 16% on both of these, but Construct 3 is bringing it in at its original size when we imported it for the very first time, which was huge. Go back to Level 1 tab and let's preview again. And there it is. So we have some placement issues. The quit, I think, looks good. I like where the quit is. Play, for some reason, is in a different spot. Okay, I know why, because the play text object is a different size. So if we go to our text and we click on txt quit, and actually we're going to have to pull it into a layer to see it, you can see that the size is 80 by 30 for that text object. If we pull in txt play, it's 89 and some change by 30. So it's different, but that's fine. Just select that, delete it. Let's go back into our functions, and we're going to move our play button a little further up. So I'm going to say maybe 16, and then we can preview that. And maybe a little bit more. I'll say minus, I don't know if 20 will be too much. Try that out. Okay, yeah, I think it was a little too much. I'm going to split the difference and go with 19. You can find a good place for yours if yours looks any different. So that is what I'm going to go with. Quit at minus 14 on the Y and continue at minus 19 on the Y. Okay, that's about half of the pause feature, and I'm going to wrap this up for this video right here. And in the next video, we'll finish up and set up some visual effects and polish up the pause feature altogether. Alright, so that's it for this one. I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to save.